180th partner event, and it's our 9th virtual meeting. We've been doing this since August. We thank you all for being here. We have 69 people signed up with us today from all over the Texas, from Canada, and a lady from Tennessee as well. And our next event is going to be held on June the 15th. And we have 2 programs already created. One of them is going to be about a virtual tour in Port Aransas of the Chapel on the Dunes. And one is going to be presented by the folks from the Texas Historical Commission about the historical markers. And we're creating a couple of other programs, and we just will let you know as soon as those are confirmed. But right now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to introduce our first presenter. Our first story is going to be the history of Fort Ringgold in Rio Grande City. And our presenter is Colonel Ross Barrera. He's a U.S. Army retired. He lives in Rio Grande City, and he is a Fort Ringgold Historic Preservation Officer. Ross, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Good morning, everyone. And
Good morning.
Today is a real tropical day here in South Texas. We're expecting a lot of rain. We've had a lot of rain, so it feels very tropical with the mosquitoes and all. So it fits the title, Tropical Texas. Anyway, so I'm a retired Army Colonel Ross Barrera, and I've been retired for about 3 years. And one of my goals is to revive or fix Fort Ringgold. Are we going to show the movie first or the slide?
The movie.
Okay. What you're going to see now is University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. They did a 28-minute video on Fort Ringgold. Very professionally well done. What I'm going to show you the first 10 minutes. The rest you can see it on YouTube. And basically, the big question has always been asked. So what happens when a fort closes down, like Fort Brown closed down in 1946? Fort Ringgold closed down in 1946 as well, and Fort McIntosh in Laredo. So what happens to the soldiers? Do they all go away? Well, this video is about, and it's called "And the Soldiers Were Gone." And in my hometown, most of the soldiers ended up marrying our beautiful ladies. So when you come to Rio Grande City, you hear last names like Cunnington, Clark, Brown, Mulvaney. I mean, all different Irish, German last names, including my family. We have those too because we're part of the descendants of the fort. So we are a blended community of a military community. And what's been happening when I was in the military, I would come home and visit my mom, and the fort was falling apart. And I'm like, what are we going to do about it? The city is new. Nobody wanted to do anything about it. So I said, I'm going to do something about it. So for the last 3 years, I've been pushing it. And finally, we were able to get some funding through some grant writing that I've done, and also through the local community. And I'm still working at it. In 2 years, in 2023, we will celebrate 175 years of Fort Ringgold, Rio Grande City, and Stark County. So get ready for a big celebration. 175 years. The last one we did was our sesquicentennial in 1998, and that was a big blast. And yes, I was in charge of that one too. I was a captain back then, but now 23 years later, I'm still doing it. So let me show you the movie in the first 10 minutes of it, get an idea of what Fort Ringgold looks like, and then I'm gonna show you a chart on how Fort Ringgold has developed through the years. So let's play the movie, please.
Fort Ringgold. Today, this South Texas historic site is both a center of education and a monument to the past. Modern-day Fort Ringgold is a bustling educational complex, complete with offices, schools, and of course, a football stadium. Walk across Fort Ringgold and you'll find a variety of artifacts, documents, and photographs, all testaments to the important role this fort has played in our nation's history. Ringgold has held influence not only in Rio Grande City or Texas, but over the U.S. as a whole. Through the gates of Ringgold, past heroes and villains, soldiers, ranchers, and business people. Each of these groups helping build and define Texas spirit.
So the purpose was to secure the boundary as much as anything else. By making a physical presence here.
Passing years brought a brand new hero through the doors of Fort Ringgold as principals, teachers, and students populated the modern Fort Ringgold educational complex. There can be little doubt this historic fort has shaped Rio Grande City for generations. First, as a military outpost, and later as a place of learning. The transition between these two missions, however, caused conflict that changed the city forever.
And the question was what to do with it. Some wanted a 2-year college, a 4-year college, a commercial center, an airport. Nobody really knew what to do. And Rio was kind of apathetic about it, because the soldiers were just returning from World War II. So the focus was on them.
To understand that conflict, we first have to know the fort's history. Looking at Ringgold, we see a complex that is part of Rio Grande City ISD. Today, Fort Ringgold is a point of community pride. The school fostered change within the district. Education brought students success. Today, Ringgold students have influenced numerous Rio Grande City students to move forward and achieve great things.
Yes, we always want our students to move forward, to be successful, to always have pride in what they do, and the final product is always a reflection of your work. We are a very patriotic town, and we instill that in the students.
Brothers and sisters, as I call your name, please stand.
Colonel Ross Barrera attended Fort Ringgold in 1978. As a student, he quickly began to take an interest in his surroundings.
There was a lot of yearbooks from years past, and I started looking at those, and I saw where there was a different generation of folks that were in my community who were no longer there.
Ross looked to his teachers for information about Fort Ringgold's history. Many of these educators were not only veterans, but also the children of soldiers once stationed at Fort Ringgold.
So I further started exploring that, and going through 5th grade all the way through high school at Fort Ringgold, I think it defined my my drive to learn more about Fort Ringgold and its people and what came before them and how it got established.
The drive to learn about Fort Ringgold's traditions influenced Colonel Barrera to not only pursue a military career, but also dig deeper into the stories of his hometown's legendary fort.
One of my favorite buildings is, of course, the barracks. The barracks with the Moorish arches. You can stare at one of those barracks. There's 5 of them, and along the parade field. And you can only imagine what this soldiers who came out of New York, Kentucky, Virginia, coming down to South Texas as early as the 1870s, all the way through 1946, and what they saw, what they thought about our area.
As a former teacher, we've always tried to keep that in our life, that it's been a fort. It was a military place. Soldiers slept here. Soldiers lived here. They had, shotguns. They used to have horses here. Trying to keep that part of our history with our kids too.
Looking at the buildings today, it can be difficult to see beyond the modern complex. But imagine, it is the mid-1850s. Incursions from along the river are a constant concern. Smugglers and rustlers from across Texas threaten the livelihoods of families and businesses in the region. Protecting the people of the area, Fort Ringgold. Beginning in the mid-1800s, Fort Ringgold served as a source of protection for Rio Grande City and much of the Rio Grande River. The camp at Davis Landing transformed into Camp Ringgold, with the mission of connecting a string of forts protecting the 2,000-mile-long Texas border. During much of the 1800s, Camp Ringgold was the region's primary defense. Soldiers from the camp patrolled the area between Fort McIntosh, located in Laredo, Texas, 107 miles to the west, and Fort Brown, located in Brownsville, Texas, 100 miles to the east.
Ringgold, like Brownsville and Laredo, were major bases, and there were smaller bases like White's Ranch and Clarksville and Roma.
Leaving troops stationed at the fort approximately 207 miles of rough brush, mesquite trees, and South Texas temperatures to defend. Ultimately, Fort Ringgold's location helped ensure stability and economic growth for Rio Grande City and the region.
The fort was named after Captain Samuel Ringgold, who was the first American officer to be killed at Palo Alto in 1846. And so not too long after they established the camp at Davis's Landing, they began to call it Camp Ringgold. It protected the border and the frontier. You had all kinds of things going on, that impacted people. Also, it was, at one point during the Civil War, it was a safe crossing for cotton.
During the U.S. Civil War, Fort Ringgold was occupied at varying times by both Southern and Northern troops. The South primarily utilized the fort as a staging ground for the sale of cotton to ports of call around the world. As the tides of war turned to the North's favor, so did the occupation of Fort Ringgold. And by war's end, the fort's mission returned to protecting the border.
With the collapse of the Confederate government, most of the local governments in Texas also collapsed, and there was really anarchy, and the Army basically was the law.
As a base for law and order, immediately after the Civil War, Fort Ringgold housed a now famous group of soldiers.
There were Buffalo soldiers there from 1866 to 75, and at other times.
With headquarters established at Fort Ringgold, these troops had a serious mission.
And they came down to try to prevent former Confederates from moving into Mexico and continuing the war from there, stop bandit raids across the river, Indian raids across the river, and also to stop the Mexican Revolution from spreading north of the river as well.
During the times immediately after the Civil War, the African American troops were a welcome addition to the Rio Grande City community. While a number of troops discovered a love for the region, many became homesick and longed to return to a family living outside of Texas. The troops were quick to notice that their tour of duty at Ringgold seemed to be extended, due in no small part to the location of their enlistment.
They understood that they enlisted for a period of 3 years, but yet they saw other men being mustered out, and they were retained. For many, the sentiment or the only reason for being retained was that they were soldiers from slave states.
One famous letter discusses the beauty of South Texas.
The weather has been truly enchanting for the last 3 days, and the boys have just completed their winter quarters. Though not as good as those we had last year in Virginia, still they are preferable. This day 1 year ago was a rather warm day for our regiment at White House, Virginia, but you know all about that, so I shall say no more. There are but 2 or 3 Americans in the place. If our regiment stays here any length of time, we will all speak Spanish, as we are learning very fast.
So that's just the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's about 28 minutes. You can go to on YouTube and type in Fort Ringgold, and you'll get the link, and it'll be a little bit better quality. And we're very proud of this movie. It's actually won some awards, some Independence Movies Awards. So it kind of gives you everything in 150 years in 30 minutes. So it's actually pretty good, and we're kind of proud about that. Now we're gonna see a slide. There's one slide. that kind of shows you in a nutshell from the barracks at Davis Landing all the way to Fort Ringgold in 1946. And it captures all the main events. The last time the fort came back to duty was in 1967 when we had Hurricane Beulah. Okay, here you go. So you look at the slide. There's another one. Well, that's kind of fine too. That shows you our history of our town. You know, we've been under Six Flags like everybody else except for Laredo. So our community was based on a bicultural community. It was Henry Clay Davis fell in love with Hilaria Aransas Falcon, who owned all the land north of the Rio Grande. And when they married, so Rio Grande, the ranch became the town, and Henry Clay Davis decided to make it into a town. Now, Fort Ringgold and Rio Grande City couldn't be without each other. Captain Forbes Britton, who later became a state senator, just like Henry Clay Davis became a state senator back in the day. Those two guys became real good friends, and good friends that kind of help each other. So the U.S. military bought the land from the Davis-Gaza family and became Fort Ringgold. And like I mentioned before, because of Fort Ringgold, it kind of placed us on the map because we were a port city. We had a lot of steamboats coming up the river. The last one that came up the river was in 1906. Then until 1926 was when we first got the train from Sanford Ice. But you can see there our history in a snapshot. It's actually pretty interesting. And what I'm trying to do with our local school district is I want to teach this because we have a lot of folks that are first generation Americans and they don't know our history. They don't know there was somebody here before them. And when you go to our historic downtown, you got the Block Motel and the Hinojosa building, and who were these people? So I'm kind of, once a week I do a short little article on people that founded the town and our local paper, and people are starting to start saying we need to preserve our history. COVID really messed up a lot of our communities, ours too. No more clubs were meeting, the Rotary, the Lions, nobody was meeting. And so we had a meeting with our city and school district, and we came up with the idea that we need to pass on this thing to our younger kids, because our historians are 80, 85 years old, and it's up to my generation and the next generation after mine to do this. So one thing that I'm doing is with the school district, we're going to start promoting history fairs. We're going to promote things that happen at the fort. We're bringing people into the fort because the school district is no longer at the fort. If you know, in the 1990s, Texas went crazy building all these new schools everywhere. So we got no schools at the fort except for one, the Ringgold Elementary. But like I mentioned before, we got funds to start fixing the buildings. It took me 3 years, and we're finally going to do it. The first renovation is going to happen in June, next month, with the old post hospital. So little by little, tiny steps. I mean, it was very hard for me people were saying, Ross, you're never going to do anything, nobody cares. So I'm going to invite you all to stay in touch with me, because in about 2.5 years, we're going to have this huge, majestic celebration of the fort. And it's going to be very, very nice. Do I have any questions?
Are there any questions? If there are no questions, we're going to thank you very much, Ross, for your presentation, for the great video. We look forward to being able to come to Rio Grande City, hopefully sometime this year or in the very near future, at least. Thank you very much.
Nancy, it's Monica. I have
Yes.
a question. Where did the funding come from?
For the renovation, one of them came from a school bond election that we just had. The community, we put it up to the community. We said, you guys want to fix it? Yes or no? Enough with selling raffle tickets, that's not going to work. That's very little money. So we got some money for that. I'm actually writing some grants, and we got some grant money. The Ed Rochelle Foundation, the Wyatt Grant Foundation. And the other thing that I'm doing is this. We're going to stand up a food truck park, like most of the cities have.
Mhm.
And all those dollars are going to go directly to our nonprofit organization, Revive Fort Ringgold. No one's going to touch it. We're looking at making at least $6,000 to $7,000 a month, and all that money is going to go directly to the fort.
Wow.
I'm not going to allow any politicos take charge of that money or any money. So they know me. All that dollars is going to go directly to the fort. That's money that we didn't have. So that's one. We got a 4-miler coming up. We're going to do a 4-mile race at the fort. It's called the Fort Ringgold 4-miler. So, you pay $25 and so forth. So we're doing fundraisers. We're doing the haunted tours in October. And in December, we're doing our Christmas at the fort with indoor Christmas market and lighting of the tree. And we're going to light up all the buildings at Fort Ringgold. And one thing that I'm working on right now is that most people do not know that Fort Ringgold had a watchtower. Because before the Border Patrol, the military had the role of protecting the border. And we had this huge watchtower. There's plenty of photos of it. So that's one of the ones that I'm going to build, that we're going to reconstruct. And that's going to be another tourist attraction.
Very nice.
Yeah. So it's a lot of work, but it's going to be done.
Colonel Barrera, I actually went to high school in Rio Grande City, and I took my home ec class in the old hospital. And yeah, I mean, back then the whole high school and junior high were right there on the fort grounds, and you actually attended classes in what had been barracks. And it was, we just took it for granted because that's what we knew as our high school. But wow, I'm so proud of you and what you've done with preserving history. And I want to talk with you a little later. I'm going to get your contact information from Nancy.
Follow us on Facebook, Revive Fort Ringgold, and you can see all our updates that we're doing. So the Revive Fort Ringgold on Facebook. So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And I see that our next presenter is here with us, Jim Moloney, and he's going to talk about, he's an author from Corpus Christi. He has been on one of our program presenters a few times. He's been with us in person several times. He has some wonderful books. And today he's going to talk about the history of the Corpus Christi water supply, which is very interesting. I have a copy of the book, I'm reading the book, and I live on Lake Corpus Christi, so it's particularly interesting to me. So Jim, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Thank you. I think Mike Carlisle, do you have a slide? So we're going to talk about this book, Water Woes, which is a history of the Corpus Christi water supply. It was originally written in 1997 by Atlee Cunningham. Let's go to the next slide. That's John Cunningham on the left and Atlee on the right, their father's son. John worked for the city of Corpus Christi in their water area for 49 years, including about 15 years running the department. He was followed by his son Atlee, who was a civil engineer, and Atlee worked for the Corpus Christi Water Department for 39 years before retiring. And then after he retired for 10 years, he worked as a consultant. And then he decided, when he fully retired, he wrote this history of the Corpus Christi Water Department. So between the two of them, they had 98 years of work for the Corpus Christi Water Department. So the water system in Corpus Christi starts in 1893. Let's go to the next slide. And at the time before that, Corpus Christi got their water by hauling barrels from the Nueces River, as well as mostly on cisterns. In the city, they collected rainwater, but when the cistern got low or out of water, then they had to buy water that was hauled in barrels. And you can see these are barrel arrows that were actually filling water from the first standpipe. The city spent, or the Corpus Christi Water Supply Company, which was private, spent $143,000 to build a pipeline from the Nueces River to a standpipe on the bluff, and also a distribution system with about 65 fire hydrants. This was for a town of about 3,000 people at the most. So that was completed on June 27th, 1893. Let's go to the next slide. So the first thing that happened is they started using that water for irrigation as well as drinking. And they found out that the crops were dying. The water was salty. So they had to stop salty water from going up the Nueces River. What was happening is the winds and the tides were pushing Nueces Bay salt water up the river into the intake station where the dam was, where the intake was. So they built a temporary dam in 1893 out of sandbags. It washed away a number of times. So in 1898, the saltwater dam right here that you see here was built on the Nueces River to keep the salt water out of the Nueces River. That has worked. It's now higher, but originally it was 2 feet high, and it's now about 8 feet high. And it dams about 928 acre feet of river water behind the dam. Saltwater dam has only been breached twice by saltwater, 1919 hurricane and 1970 hurricane Celia. Both of those dams pushed saltwater over the dam and into the river. But within a few hours on both of those, the rains on the other side of the dam flushed out that salt water and the city returned to regular water again. But that was the first big crisis. Let's go to the next slide. The La Fruta Dam. You can see this is an old postcard. It's called Lovenskold Dam here. It was built in the era of Mayor Lovenskold. It cost $2.75 million to build this dam, and it supplied millions of gallons of fresh water. It was completed in 1930. In 1920, the population of Corpus Christi was 10,500 people. 10 years later, in 1930, it was almost 30,000 people, 27,800. And then another 10 years, it got up to 57,000 people. So in 20 years, the population grew 5.5 times, from 10,000 to 57,000. So Corpus Christi needed a new supply of water, and that's what the La Fruta Dam was. It was on the Nueces River, and it dammed the sufficient supply for all of the city of Corpus Christi. Let's go to the next slide. The dam broke. It was finished in January of 1930. In November of 1930, there was a dam break. And the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that dam is actually empty. There is no water at all. It totally leaked out. What had happened is they had put sheet piling to keep the water from permeating through the dam. They put it 9 feet below the dam level, the water level. However, the impervious clay was 12 feet below the water level. So water percolated under the dam, and in a short period of time, less than a year, we had a major dam break. The major problem with that was that the city of Corpus Christi had promised Southern Alkali, our first major industry, a supply of water for their industry. And all of a sudden, we didn't have any water. So it was Panic City, and they rebuilt it. And it was repaired in July of 1934 at a cost of just over $500,000. But that solved the problem for Southern Alkali and gave Corpus Christi another water supply. However, as you saw earlier, the city was growing. Let's go back to the next slide. And by 1950, we had 57,000 people, and it doubled again in 10 years to 1960. So the city was growing so fast that more water was needed. And so they built the Wesley Seal Dam, and you see that there. And Wesley Seal was about 10 times as large as La Fruta Dam, and it was successful. And it opened in 1958. It was dedicated at a cost of $7.5 million. Let's go to the next page. There was a problem with the dam, though. You can see there the rupture. in 1965, it had been predicted that the dam might not be able to stand up to heavy waves. In 1965, in a February storm, a norther came through that pushed major waves across Nueces Bay. It was just the right, or across the dam, the Lake Corpus Christi, and it was at the right angle and so forth that it actually caused the upper part of the dam to rupture. And on February 23rd, it broke. We ended up losing 10 feet of water in the dam. The elevation dropped to 88 feet, and they lost 94,000 acre feet of water to the dam. And it took about a year and a half to repair, and another cost of over $1 million to fix the dam again. So then we had Lake Corpus Christi again. However, the city was growing. Let's keep on going. One more slide. City was growing again. It doubled again in the next 10 years. And by 1984, we were in the midst of a major drought. Nancy, you might recognize this. I don't know how long you've lived on Lake Corpus Christi, but in 1984, there was a major drought. And those are piers that are normally at water level. And you can see that the dam was down, way down in Corpus Christi. And I lived through this drought in 1984. Many of us did. The city was on severe water rationing. Were not allowed to water your lawns. So we were buying treated sewer water and having men with large tanks of water in trailers coming out and watering our lawns and especially our foundation. So nobody wanted to lose their foundation. And that was going on in 1984.
I do live on Lake Corpus Christi, and my pier is out of water right now, just like those.
Yep, it's way down again.
Yes.
So we're in the midst of a drought, even though it just rained like crazy. The water in Lake Corpus Christi between last week and now is up a foot.
Yes,
Hopefully it'll
and coming
go
up.
more. But so we're in a constant problem. We're in a drought right now. Corpus Christi is the first stage of water supply. So the solution to this, and they started in 1965. Let's go to the next slide. Is to build a new dam, and there were two choices for the dam. There was one called the R&M plan, which would have dammed the Nueces River below Corpus Christi, Lake Corpus Christi, between the lake and the town, and the other was Choke Canyon Reservoir. And Choke Canyon Reservoir was going to be about $15 million less in price than the R&M dam. The original estimate in 1965 was that the Choke Canyon would cost $24 million and that the R&M dam would cost $40 million. So there was a big dispute in the city which way to go. The problem with Choke Canyon was, and you can see it on that map, only one branch of the Nueces River system. There's three different branches to the Nueces. Only one was dammed on Choke Canyon. And that has proven to be a problem because Choke Canyon has filled once and now it's about 15 feet below its level, and it hardly ever fills. It's only filled once. So it has not proved to be our source of water that we thought it was going to be. What had happened was there were two different factions in the city. One wanted the R&M dam and one wanted the Choke Canyon dam, and they put it up to the vote of the citizens. And as usual, the citizens voted the wrong way. And so we got the wrong dam. So the next solution is, go to the next solution, next page, is the Mary Roads pipeline. And the pipeline was, again, that's another thing that was defeated by the city of Corpus Christi when they voted on it. The city decided they didn't think they needed that, the citizens decided they didn't want to spend bond money on that pipeline. Mary Rhodes became the mayor, and the port of Corpus Christi decided if the city wouldn't build that pipeline, the port would. Mary was convinced by one of her advisors, Bernard Paulson, that the city really ought to build that pipeline, that they didn't really want the port to control that water. And so we built a pipeline between Lake Texana and Corpus Christi, 101 miles, and it was completed in 1998 at $132 million. And then there was an 40-mile extension that would buy us another 35,000 acre feet of water. And that was completed in October of 2016 at a cost of 155 million. So between the two of them, we now have enough water to last us. And the estimate was when those two were completed, it would at least work until 2030. So we are now to the point where 2030 is approaching us. And what are we going to do? There are going to be no more dams. So let's go to the next stage. Desal is next. And we are in the process right now of having lots of factions argue over where desal should go. And we are now having, I think there's 4 or 5 different sites around Corpus Christi that have been proposed. One of them in the Inner Harbor, one on Harbor Island, one on San Patricio County, and one on the island. My theory is that eventually, as Corpus Christi and industry continues to grow, that we will need all 4 or 5 of them before we're done. Next slide. Father's Day is coming up. What else to do but to buy him a book? And so the Corpus Christi Water Woes is available, as well as, let's go to that page. Next page. That's Water Woes. It's available from my website, Nueces Press, as well as all of our other books are available. I've got a total of 14 books that have been published so far. 13 of them were written by Murphy Gibbons, and this 14th one was written by Atlee Cunningham. And they're all available on the website, nuecespress.com. They're all good reads. I've talked about many of them in the past to the group, and I think with that, go to the last page. I'm pretty much done. This is just a brief overview of the city. I'm Jim Moloney. Nueces Press is a hobby. I do this in my spare time. I actually work in the gas compressor business full time. But you can call me on my phone number, email me, or go to the website and order a book. And if you don't like to order books on the website, call me, and I'll take the stuff over the phone, and we will go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I am reading the book. It's very interesting. It's, as Jim told me before I received the book, it requires your concentration, but it is well worth it. And because I live on the lake, it's very interesting.
I talked this morning on the Blake Farenthold radio show about the book. And what I did is I took the one decade from 1925 to 1935, and there's a 2-page summary of what's in that chapter. So you can actually go through the summaries and look, and then if that's something you want to read about, you can go back into the chapter and find that portion and read about it. So you don't have to read the entire book. And I've added a bunch of different additional pictures into the book. So it's got about 65 different photographs and maps in there, which helps tell the story of our water supply. But the whole history of Corpus Christi is it's surrounded by water, and none of it's suitable to drink.
Water everywhere, not a drop to drink. Jim also has another book coming out towards the end of the year about Zachary Taylor, and we look forward to having you back with us then, Jim, to go review that book for us as well. So.
Pencil me in for November, because we're going to introduce it in early November, just in time for Christmas, and it's Murphy Gibbons' last book. Murphy, as some of you may not know, but Murphy passed away late December from lung cancer, and in his last year, he finished a couple projects that he wanted to do, and one of them was the book on Zachary Taylor. He had written one years ago, but he was never very satisfied with. And so this one summarizes all of the U.S. Army's stay in Corpus Christi from 1845 to 1846, and then the trip down to the valley and the first 2 battles in the valley, Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. And then after that, it goes into Mexico, and the book stops. But it's the tale of Zachary Taylor and his army in Texas.
We'll look forward to that. Are there any questions or comments at all?
Nancy, I would say you don't have to live on a lake to enjoy this book because water is just such a common challenge and problem for the people who settled in our area in many parts of Texas. I know it's a big story here in eastern Cameron County, down the very tip of Texas. Water was a big struggle. And for those of us who can turn on the tap or water our yards and enjoy it freely at this point in time, we've really lost sight of what the struggle was just 100 years ago. So I really appreciate your presentation.
Yeah, Corpus Christi originally started being just a water supply system for the town of Corpus Christi, and it now supplies water for over 500,000 people throughout the area. So this is a story of everybody's water in the Nueces County and San Patricio County areas.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I'm going to back up for just a second because I neglected to introduce myself. I am Nancy DeVinny. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Tropical Trail Region, 20 counties, and I live on Lake Corpus Christi in Live Oak County. And now I'm going to move forward with our next presentation, and it's about the sesquicentennial of Aransas County. And it's going to be presented by Pam Stranahan, who represents the History Center for Aransas County. And she's a great person to have on your team. She has been with us for many presentations, both virtual and in person, and we look forward to having her with us many times in the future. Take it away, Pam.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I hope you can see our emblem for the sesquicentennial. This is 150 years that our county, Aransas County, has been in existence. It was broken off from Refugio County in 1871. And as we were planning this big celebration, we realized we really needed an exhibit that would tell the story of all of Aransas County. And so the History Center for Aransas County took on that job several years ago. Our board said we need to tell the big picture. We were accustomed to telling segments of the story in depth, but now we really needed an exhibit that would show the entire history, let people who came to town, new people, really see what went on in Aransas County. So the History Center is sort of a boutique museum, a small museum, but we really try to tell the big story. So Mike, if you will bring up that video, I'll take you on a tour of our exhibit, which is called Voices from the Past.
Welcome to our most recent exhibit called Voices from the Past. Our committee worked on this exhibit for about 2 years because we typically do really in-depth exhibits. And this one had to be the big picture. The big picture for Aransas County. We call it the making of Aransas County so that you understand that the whole story will be told here. Like many areas along the bays, we first of all had the American Indians here. We called them the Copan Indians, or the Spanish called them the Copan Indians. They were a member of the Karankawa tribe. They were actually named Karankawa by the Spanish. It was a Spanish word for small boat. So they were identifying the dugout canoes that they had. Later, we had the Spanish who established a port in Copano in the 1700s. This was such a surprise to many people to learn about this early time that the Spanish were here and set up a port. So what we want to do is trace the story of Aransas County during the time of the Republic of Texas. We had major people here, people who signed the Declaration of Independence, people who were impresarios and actually had the cause to really bring people in from Ireland. As we move through the exhibit, you'll begin to see that we try to tell the story from the people. Again, we want the voices of the people to be heard. So we first have a story of James Power. Power came from Ireland, and he was given an impresario grant to bring in Irish and Mexican citizens to this area. So the Mexican government was interested in setting up a buffer zone between Mexico and the United States, and they thought Texas could serve that way. So they were happy to grant this, make this grant to Power in order to bring in Catholics who would be willing to participate in the Mexican government, because that's what it was at the time. Now, we have artifacts that tell us about Power's colony. And this is a really wonderful exhibit that tells us how much was going on in trade. These artifacts came from a bluff on Coconut Bay. Power settled there in the 1820s. And these artifacts show that they were not just an outpost. They had a lot of trade going on with New Orleans, Havana, and the rest of the United States. So what you see here is the pottery from that time period. We call it transferware. There's some wonderful little pictures that depict sailing vessels as well as a cross. You see a pipe, a crinoline pipe. These pipes were poured into molds and made, and they were a big trade item. The discs that are green that are on the stand there are actually wine seals from the Médoc region of France. When we saw those, when we found those, I was amazed. We just don't think about our colonists being here in the 1830s and having such a sophisticated lifestyle. One other item I'd like to call your attention to is this coin, which is very difficult to see, but we have blown up a photograph of it. This is a coin that is critical of Andrew Jackson and his attempt to bring in a national bank. So this is really unique, again, because this dates from the early 1800s. Then we know that what was so important, why Rockport was even put here, is this bay, this big background that you see on this mural. This bay offered people a chance to dock very, very comfortably. So Rockport was named for the rocky ledge. There is a ledge of limestone that allowed the ships to come in and have a very strong place to dock. We have a piece of that limestone outside, actually, in our display in the yard. You'll have to see that when you come to visit us. The people who brought this in established a wharf, okay? And it was Richard Wood and James Daugherty, and they built what was known as the Big Wharf. This was after the Civil War, when there were many cattle roaming in South Texas. And the cowboys, ranchers, gathered the cattle up, rounded up the cattle, and brought them to the Big Wharf. There they loaded them live on schooners that would go to New Orleans, to Cuba, and to the East Coast. So that was really the beginning of commerce here in Aransas County and in Rockport. Later, we had the Morgan steamship line that came in to also bring service to this new port. Yeah. Here we have an area that we will say, please touch. This is a stereoscope. You've probably seen it before with the pictures that give you the 3D look way back in the 1800s. As Rockport develops as a town, we of course demand a courthouse. So we have one of the most spectacular courthouses anywhere. It was built in 1889. However, it got abandoned during the modernization craze and was actually demolished. So we have a brick actually from that courthouse, and we have a seal from the county court and keys from the county jail. So we wanted to be sure and represent this era. Next, we have a real effort to sell the coast by the Gulf Coast Immigration Company in 1910. It promoted the town and farming in the area. We had a very rich vegetable and fruit farming that went along in the early 1900s. We also were extremely part of the Hug the Coast Highway in 1926 to encourage tourists to come. By that time, people were driving, and it becomes a different way to get here. One of the biggest merchants in town was the Sorensen Mercantile. The Sorensen Mercantile is still here. It's one of the buildings that's downtown Rockport. Today, it's called the Coastal Mercantile. And what we have here is a wonderful interior of the store itself, along with the coffee grinder. It was the commercial coffee grinder for the store. There was a wharf that went out from the back of the Sorensen store, so that it was called Mercantile, that could serve all of the schooners that were coming in. And here we have a typical schooner. This is a wonderful model that was made for us to specifically go in this exhibit. This is a little earlier than our 1870 development. This would have been used during the Civil War. We didn't have much going on right here in Rockport during the Civil War. Our home guard was very active, but the Union did come in to discourage gun runners from being in the bay. And this is a model of a gun runner, Confederate gun blockade runner called the Texas Star. We do have records of Lamar being shelled and bombarded during that time, and we have an example of a cannonball that was found on the beach at Lamar Peninsula. Of course, one of the really important industries here in Rockport is shrimping. And we have a wonderful shrimp boat and a poster talking about ships and captains and all of the different pieces that go together, talking about really what was going on with our waterfront here. We were also very important during World War I, building ships, and World War II, building submarine chasers and fireboats. As we continue to tell the story of the development of Rockport, we have the tourist industry, which came in 1888 with the railroad. Many people think of us as a tourist town today. They don't recognize that our tourism really began in the late 1800s because people could take a train from San Antonio, come in for the day, and go back on a night train, or stay a day or two. So we had some beautiful hotels. We had fantastic resort hotels. We have a photograph of one of them here. This was the Del Mar Hotel. And it was, as you can see, 3 or 4 stories high. It had a dining room that seated 200. Probably the most famous person who came here was Governor Hogg. There was also a pavilion behind this hotel. Here you see the Bailey Pavilion. It was an entertainment center in the evenings, but during the day you could rent a space for a dime, 10 cents, and go into your area and change out of your elaborate clothing and into a swimming suit. So this was what they enjoyed. I should say a bathing suit, because they didn't really swim. They mainly sat in the water and cooled off. But this was a wonderful thing for the people coming from the interior. It was very, very popular. Also, at the same time, we had many people coming in to hunt and fish. The hunting for ducks and geese must have been phenomenal. We see that people belonged to the St. Charles Bay Hunting Club all the way from Kansas City, Missouri. In this case, we have artifacts from some of the hotels. So we have the Del Mar, we have some spoons from the Del Mar, a juice set from the Del Mar, and a vase that was a souvenir vase for the Bayside Inn. Our middle shelf here tells about our next era, which was the one of the art colony. We had the artists coming in the 40s beginning to teach, and we had Simon Michael and Estelle Starr, who were the people that really encouraged other artists to join them in what they were doing down here. The coast, of course, had great weather, good light, and wonderful scenery. So the next part of our story talks about the art colony that came in and the environmental concerns that came in and have continued to be very important of what Rockport supports. So we have some story about Connie Hager, who came here in the 30s, recorded over 500 species of birds, and was the real impetus for people paying attention to the flyways and to the migration of the hummingbirds. So we honor her, as did the Audubon Society when they brought their meeting here in the 1960s. If you haven't seen enough at this point, then we have a show of postcards, which are absolutely fascinating. You'll see some of the scenes that we've talked about, and you'll see other scenes that you'd like to identify or wonder at. These postcards are from the Jim Moloney collection, and we really appreciate his letting us use these for this purpose. We hope that you'll join us. This exhibit will be up for at least a year or two, and the reason that we put this up is for you to be able to send friends here and say, do you want to learn about Rockport Fulton? It's all here on the walls. It'll probably take you 45 minutes to an hour to truly look at the posters, look at the artifacts, and go away with a comprehensive story of Rockport Fulton. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Hey. Well, here we are at the gift shop. You can purchase items here or you can purchase them online. We really make a specialty of bringing in very specific local books. So our most recent book is the ABCs of the Rockport Fulton Art Colony. And this was designed to be used by teachers and kids. And it's wonderful. It's a really good story of based on one of the exhibits that we featured here at the History Center. Another book that we have available is Taking the Tide, all about the shrimping in the area. Another exhibit that turned into a book was Foodways. This was early on, about 3 years ago, and it's not just about foodways, it's about the restaurants, menus, and all of the history associated with them. We also have the story by our editor of our newspaper called 30 Years Through the News Lens, which takes you through the years 1984 to 2013. An early book that was published by the History Center before we'd even opened this little center is Aransas County and Postcards. It's still one of the most popular that we have. And the classic book that was written probably 20 years ago, maybe 25, is called Aransas, Life in the Texas Coastal Community.
We thank you, Pam, and it was very interesting and very professionally done exhibits that you have there. We encourage people to visit, and Valerie will tell you a little bit about what we're going to give away later regarding a visit to the History Center. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Pam?
I just want to say, Pam, after you watch something like that, the question to the rest of us is like, well, what have y'all been doing? I mean,
or what's next, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a big challenge. You say you are a small boutique museum, but that is a very big story, and You guys just do such a good job in stewardship for your history. Very proud of y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pam, this is Monica Burdett, and I just want to thank you again for always representing Rockport and Aransas County so well. And really, you all are such hard workers, and I couldn't be prouder of you.
Thank you, Monica. We appreciate your support.
And this is Jim Moloney. I just want to tell you, I was really impressed with the way you blew those postcards up. They're really quite interesting photographs when you get them up on the wall.
Those were some of the best handpicked, but people stand there for, 5 to 10 minutes and have a wonderful time seeing them, Jim. Thank you for your contribution.
It's amazing how things have changed in 120 years.
Pam? Thank you very much.
Pam?
Pat, you want to say something?
I just wondered if Pam wanted to give the visiting hours for the History Center.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Yes, we're open 4 days a week. We're open on Fridays, 10 to 2, Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4, and Monday, 10 to 2. So we try to stay open over the weekend and the sort of the side views of the weekend.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our final program of today, and it's going to take place in Brownsville, down at the tip of Texas and the tip of our region as well. Eugene Fernandez is with us to narrate this very interesting program. He is the director of the South Texas Center for Historical and Genealogical Records. And he's going to tell us today about historic Jagou Plantation, the Montezuma cypress trees, and kayaking on La Posada, Resaca. Both of those areas are right outside of Brownsville. Eugene, go ahead, please.
Yes, this is a double-barreled presentation because you can't have the cypresses without mentioning the Jagou Plantation. Let me start with the cypresses. Ross could appreciate this very much so because back when the original Spanish explorers came through the area in 1519 onwards, they wrote what's called informes back to the King of Spain, telling what they saw. They wanted an inventory of what was on the landscape at that time. There is mention, and I've seen this in a translation of the old informes, that there were cypresses at that point in time, mind you, at the beginning of Western man coming into our South Texas zone, that cypresses existed from the tree line, which is about 3 miles from the Gulf, all the way up to Roma, mind you. That would be tens of thousands of cypress trees. Now let's flash to present. If you go back 14 years, I began my particular search and study of the cypresses in about the year 2006, 2007. So say in the 14 years, at that point in time, the word cypress wasn't even on the streets. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody that knew or could even recognize a cypress tree if it fit them. And over these years, there's an awareness, and that's part of the plan, to bring that cypress back into the consciousness of the people that are here now. And as I have done an inventory of what cypresses are still in existence, the original cover, as well as what had been planted by the hand of man from the turn of the century on up. The cypress is a wonderful tree. It's a beautiful tree. It got actually driven into extinction because of its beauty. Now, all of us know that all of us here in this gathering are beautiful in their own regard, and let that be a lesson. If you're too beautiful, you're going to be driven into extinction. So, right, that's the hazards of the occupation. All right, let's zip to the PowerPoint, and the first actual little slide there says an introduction about what this was all about, and the theme of what we're getting into when we get into cypresses. Second one, please. All right, now, some of you, especially in the upper reaches going towards the hill country, will recognize this kind of shot. These are cypresses, but that's a different species. You have what's called Taxodium pisticum, which is the bald cypress, on the tributaries of the upper Nueces, the Guadalupe, pedernales and all of that getting into central Texas. But you see the beauty of it. You see the expanded trunk, see the reliance on water there. And if, of course, you had been to San Antonio and you see the river walk there, it's the same species. That came from east to west. Now, on the second one, next one, please. There is our beautiful treasury. This shot I took back in the year about 2011, and these are our cypresses. They are of the species called Taxodium mucronatum, or the Montezuma cypress. Don't make the mistake of saying Montezuma bald cypress because you're saying AAA Ford car. Two different species under the family name of Taxodium. But this is what you can see today on the outskirts of Brownsville. The water body there is the Resaca de la Palma, and that was just at the point where we drained the Resaca in order to work on the old bridge. Next, please. As you can see, there's another shot, and this is as it looked when the original Spanish groups of exploration came through our region. And I am glad to say that's the way it looks now to a great degree. This is a little postage stamp of what the ecology looked like back in those formative periods of colonization. Next. All right, you see the range of the two species. The one on the right, of course, is a disticum. It actually survives in acidic soil. The one on the left is a mucronatum. It came from, as I said, the other one came from east to west. This one comes from south to north, up the tributaries that then commingle with the Rio Grande. And that's the Taxodium mucronatum. It's a more broad type of a tree. It is not quite as straight and upwards as the bald cypress is. It has several differences. It's not a deciduous tree, which means it doesn't shed its leaves in the fall and whatever as much as the other species. Carry on. Next. This was a photograph that was taken back in the 20s of a photographer coming into the region. Those that were here that actually witnessed seeing cypresses before they were cut down entirely marveled at, and you can't help it because that's a work of art. You look at how the gnarled roots hug and reinforce the bank areas there. It's a picture subject no matter what angle you're from. Next. Now, this is one of the tributaries that I told you about that came into the area of about Falcon Dam. Falcon Dam has the confluence of what you call the Rio Sabinas and several other. This one in particular, this shot is from an interior river in Mexico, and you see the cypresses lining those. Thank God, those kinds of shots are available today. There are still strong regions of forestation of the cypresses throughout those particular rivers in Mexico. Unfortunately, ours have been brought into extinction. Carry on. There are evidences throughout the landscape, but you have to know what you're looking for when you find them. These are railroad ties that were found out on Jackass Flats. That was the railroad that went from the Boca Chica Pass on into White Ranch back at the time of the Civil War. Well, it's actually the initial part was built by Taylor in 1846. But that is a cypress railroad tie that's lying out there, and they are a very strong wood, so therefore it's preserved. It'll be there probably another 1,000 years. Next one. Now, here's the sad part. I saw from time to time throughout my wanderings various evidences that there had been cypresses there, and this is one that was cut down probably in the 70s as a canal was being dug for the irrigation of the southmost region. But there it is, a lonely example of what once was a mighty tree. Next one, please. Now, this is a smoking gun. That's Max Pons right there. He was the director of the Nature Institute, Nature Conservancy out in Southmost. And I asked Max when I was doing my research on trying to find examples of old growth. there are several, there are not that many, but there are trees throughout the Rio Grande Valley that were, say, planted at the turn of the century and whatever. They say, oh, those must have been here 1,000 years. This trunk was like 5 feet in diameter, and it was on an old distributary, an old Resaca bank that, of course, was originally part of the Rio Grande, and there she lies. It was about 20 feet high before Beulah came through. It was already dead, and then the top was whacked off in Beulah, and we found it out in the bush. So that shows you that there was original growth in the area. This one was missed by the lumber people. Next one. You see that little dotted line on the bottom of that kind of peninsula there? That's the salt flats that are out there behind the dunes of Boca Chica. And that little dotted line is a causeway that was built, began with Taylor, as I say, 46, and then it was strengthened by General Sheridan at the time of the Civil War. And so those pilings, guess where they came from? They had to decimate the still existing trees that were on the river in 1865. So we calculated about, maybe 700 trees were cut down in order to do that little path right there, which really took a hit on the population. Next, please. That's one of the posts. Now you can't imagine a normal piece of even treated pine existing to modern times, but that's one right there. I sent samples of these pilings off to Washington in order to test them to be cypress or not, and they were cypress indeed. Next one, please. You see there? If you go through the valley, you're going to find, especially in the Resaca region, which is Los Fresnos, and in the outskirts of Brownsville, San Benito, and all of that. That's one of the trees, but it looks as though it's 1 million years old, right? That's one of the beauties of these cypresses. But this one was, again, planted on a Resaca outside of Los Fresnos at the turn of the century. Next, please. There's original growth. I found this one by talking to the irrigation district. And of course, I drew them into my search squad, saying, "Do you see any of these out in the bush that might be from original growth?" And I found this one in what was called the Nogales Plantation. There in outside of Brownsville and South. Most of that is original growth. Another smoking gun. Next, please. This one is all right, in the later, at the time of the First World War, at the end of the First World War, going off into the 20s, we had a lot of work done by the predecessors of the Works Progress Administration and the Conservative Conservation Corps. This was planted in the region of about 1921. Mayor Robert Runyon, a lot of you can recognize that name, set out to create a botanical garden in what was called Lincoln Park area. Well, you see the expressway overhead? That particular diminutive leg of the Resaca, it's what's called the town Resaca, housed a number of cypresses, but there were only 3 remaining to present day. The other ones that had grown up in almost 100 years were cut down in order to make that overhead. And let me just add a little note. I was on a mission not too long ago, was within this last year, and this lady called me, she says, "Mr. Fernandez, you don't know me. I was on one of your tours, and you better get over to Lincoln Park." And I knew what she was. So I ran on over there, and there were 2 of the 3 remaining. There were 2 that were butchered. They were cut off at about the 20-foot level. They're like, again, butchered. So I set out on a campaign in order to do a petition to hold TxDOT responsible for this. And we got 12 trees that were the 10-foot size to replace the poor ones that had been butchered by TxDOT. And they were very apologetic. And now we've got 12 more that we are planting around the Resacas of Brownsville in order to carry on the legacy. Next one, please. That one really took a lot of people by surprise. This is off of Central Boulevard in Brownsville. And if any of the old timers remember a Chester Wheelock, he used to have a nursery at that point. And then later on, I guess in modern times, not too long ago, it was called Amazonas. It was a restaurant. Well, that particular tree, I found out by talking to Morris Clint, Saint Morris Clint, that he had given that little sapling to Chester Wheelock back in 1954 as probably a 1 inch diameter tree. And then hence look at the beauty of it now. Next one, please. And then there's another one, but this one actually was, there's a confusion whether it was planted by Morris Clint or Fred Rusterberg. Fred Rusterberg was in that conservation corps that I mentioned to you at the time just prior to the Great Depression. He planted some trees out on, this is the extension of, and my world of babying my little coven of cypress trees. It's at the Jagou Plantation. The Jagou Plantation began in 1872 when a Frenchman came into the area and he took over a piece of land, 640 acres and a mule, from Captain King and Captain Kennedy and Dalzell and all of those. And he started a plantation. Of course, this is post-Civil War. And he really let his mind go to the furthest extension. He put in all kinds of fruit trees. Haven't you, as a child, ever thought about having a plot of land and you can walk out on your porch and pick a pear or an apple or get some grapes, like a little Elysium? That's what he had there, and that's the Jagou Plantation. I got the state plaque, since I'm the chairman of the Historical Plaque Committee for the Cameron County Historical Commission. I got the plaque for the bridge that you're going to see in this video, and we have done thousands of hours of sweat equity in order to bring this thing into public view. So carry on.
Hey guys, it's me, Craig, from Brownsville Living and the RGV Living Network, and I'm here with my good friend, Gene Fernandez, and we are at what is currently known as La Posada Park in Brownsville. It's in the center, the heart of Southmost, and Gene has been at the forefront of helping to restore the water to this Resaca in order to save the beautiful cypress trees that are here. So Gene, welcome. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, this is a historic site in a number of different regards. Number one, the City of Brownsville and City Commission, thanks to Trey Mendez, Mayor and City Commission, has taken the initiative to put water back in this Resaca. Prior to this point, you wouldn't recognize it. It was all occluded, brush and everything, and there was no water in it. So, and another thing is that we're going to go on a little kayak safari here. This is the first time in the history of mankind that you could actually see a kayak on this Resaca. We're not in central Texas. We're not in the hill country with all those cypresses there. We're in the Rio Grande Valley. And look at those 7 magnificent Montezuma cypresses. The collective age of all of those trees is well over 1,000 years. Each one of them's probably 250 years of age. Aren't they beautiful? Now, this is the type of a vista that we've been wanting to have for so long along this Jagou Plantation Resaca. What you're seeing now is highly unusual. Going back over the past 8 years, there hasn't been any water in here at all. There was a plan by the city, newly developed, in order to reintroduce water back in here. What you see on the surface of the water right now is just the fluff that was here on dry land. It will eventually stabilize and this water will be clear. Look how clear it is underneath all of this.
We ran into Zio here. Zio is a local mountain biker. He's actually a friend of mine on Facebook, and he happened to be here when we were shooting, hitting the trails on the mountain bike. So tell us, what have you been up to, Zio?
Just trail maintenancing, and I'm out here every other day checking out on the Montezumas, making sure people don't come and vandalize and throw their litter out here and come throw their trash. Me and my family come out here, like I said, every other day, and we do our trash roundups.
That's awesome. It looks spectacular out here, man. So did you come out here with the bushwhack and get all these, cut all these limbs back?
Yes. Last after the COVID was announced, and we were all, had to be.
So what am I gonna do, right?
So what am I gonna do? I was born and raised here in La Posada, and I always loved it out here. So I figure, you know what? I always work out of town, truck driver for 14 years. So I decided to bring my children out here, and we noticed a beautiful Montezumas. And I remember as a kid, hey, I want to give back to the community. So me and my family decided, hey, let's go out here and build a trail.
Bro, thank you so much. It looks fantastic, man. I can't wait to come out here and hit the trails with you.
This depth marker says 3 feet. The eventual dredging of it will bring it down an additional 4 feet. Before me here, you see the historic Jagou Plantation Bridge, built in 1893 by French planter Célestin Jagou. We did a refurbishing on this bridge according to historic proportions, and it now has a historic plaque granted by the state of Texas. This bridge is a copy of a bridge that's behind Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on the River Seine. It's called Le Pont Neuf. Why do you think it's here? Why do you think it looks like? We had a Frenchman that had this plantation. He built this bridge from what he remembered from Paris. Can you imagine? 1893. The shear waters actually, at the time of flood, kept all of the wood and logs and whatever from crashing into the bridge. So it's traditionally a protective measure. But every one of these brick, and there's supposedly 90,000 of them, were formed right here. There are 2 kilns over here on the plantation where they fired all of these brick from the clay that was in this Resaca. What you see behind me here are the kilns. Baking kilns for making the brick. You can't have the chicken before the egg. So when Célestin Jagou wanted to build that bridge over there, the 1893 bridge, he built these kilns first, and he dug the clay out of the Resaca bed, and he produced 90,000 brick in order to make that bridge.
Well, guys, thanks so much for the tour. Gene, I'd like to thank you.
Oh, this is my pleasure.
Zio, thank you for stumbling up on us and for all the hard work you've done to clear the trails.
You're welcome.
Guys, this is so important that we preserve our history. These beautiful trees, this park, this is something for generations to come to enjoy from all over. Even, people could come from out of town to check this out as a historical site. The next phase is to continue to stabilize the water and then to work with the city and the county and the Parks Department to build a real rec center and park here that we can all enjoy. So be sure to get the word out, let the mayor know, let Commissioner Golonsky know that this is something that's very important to our community and we support it. Thanks so much, guys.
Yes, thank you for sharing that with us. Literally a hidden gem. It really
It's a dream
is.
come true. May I close on 2 points, please?
Certainly.
Okay. The account of all of that about the Jagou plantation and the history of the cypresses, which was researched in great depth, is available in my book, which is called Jackass Flat. And that's available through Amazon, Lawrence Fernandez, Amazon.com. The final point that I'd like to close with is this last week, I was presented with a baby, a building for my research institute. I now have a roof over my head. And so I'm so pleased to have all my collections centered in one location and for the South Texas Center of Historical and Genealogical Research. So please, I'll keep you all up to breast on that.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I know there was one question from Mallory, but how many pilings are there still left?
There's the evidence of pilings, but now it's split into 2 points. One is a sable palm, because the sable palm doesn't rot. That's why it was used for wharves and docks back in Baghdad and all of that. And then on the other ones that have survived the hurricanes, I would venture to say that they're teams of 2. There's probably 60 of them that still have a little stump protruding from the sands. But it went all the way from the dune line over to the higher land that was on the way to White's Ranch.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on? If not, thank you again very much. We look forward to maybe trying to get down that way sometimes ourselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie now.
Well, I thank you all for joining us on the 180th partner event, virtual style. Thank everybody for hanging in with us over all these months. And we're looking forward to in-person meetings. We don't know when that's going to start yet, but we must certainly be getting closer to it. Also, we really value your opinions. We look at what's in the chat and can gather some gems there, but we appreciate you filling out the survey so we know what's a hit and what's a miss in how we're putting these together. And so as a little incentive, this month The History Center for Aransas County and Rockport has donated a guided tour for 2 to 4 persons as an incentive for folks to complete our post-event survey for today's event. So we would appreciate if y'all would participate in that, and we'll throw you in the drawing. I would like to personally thank Allison Baker for attending today with the members of her class from Quebec, Canada.
Manitoba.
Manitoba, and that is in Canada.
As big as Texas.
Well, something has to be, right? And also, Allison, listen, I want the world to know that we are looking at the jalapeno eating contest winner in Laredo.
Third place.
Third place. You're a winner in our books. Thank you for still hanging out with us. We miss you here down in South Texas, and glad you're still interested in border studies and things like of that nature. Nancy, our next meeting is, of course, you announced that at the top. What are the dates again in June?
June 15th.
June 15th. We'll see you on our computers again. We appreciate everybody for joining, Commissioner Burdette as well, and all the THC staff members that join us every month. Thank you so much. And we'll see you
Valerie,
next month. Yes.
I did have time to think of a question for Gene. If a person wanted to go and view some of those beautiful cypress trees, how would they go about doing that? Are people just basically on their own? Is there someone who can take you to them? How does that work?
I've got my keys in my hand, and I'm really literally available 27, how you say, 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. So if you wanted to do a virtual on it, go into Google Maps and Google in the address of 1325 La Posada Road. And then you can see the general area that's there. But of course, going back into where the Resaca is the true story. So just, I don't hesitate in the least. If you call me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can go, seriously, I'll get out there and give you a tour. And I've done it many times because that's how proud we are of this.
Well, it's just magnificent. And thank you for doing what you've done with it.
You're welcome.
A follow-up question to that. If you've considered it all or partnered with any organizations who might be interested in creating or formalizing something that would allow visitors to tour the area, like a path or a nature trail. I saw someone riding a bike in the background when you were in the kayak. And so I didn't know if there was a trail there, or if he was just off-roading, I don't know.
No, amazingly enough, when I went in there 13 going on 14 years ago, you couldn't get through with a barge pole. It was like so dense. We've tried to maintain the undergrowth, because mind you, this is a preserve. It is where nature reigns beyond man. But there is a trail going across a hogback that goes the full length of it, and a person can stop at the curbside there on La Posada Road and walk on up and then cross the bridge and then walk down. And you'll see the landscape that looked the way it did back at the time of the conquistadores. We are also partnering with City of Brownsville in order to include this in as a city park. And there's about 2-point-something million that is earmarked for the development of that part. And then I might have mentioned about the Butterfly Center up in Mission. I talked with them in order to put that as another module in this whole project. So you not only will have the nature, you'll have, when I went up to Mission just last week, saw all of the butterflies, and I saw the host plants that drew the butterflies, and I saw 1 billion birds. That's what we want.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that this concludes our program, right, Valerie?
Yes, ma'am. Concludes our program. Really, as usual, well done, and a big variety of presentations. And everybody's just getting a whole lot slicker at this, aren't they? We're really proud of everybody's participation and the creativity.
And thanks to Mike Carlisle for his genius at getting it all together for us. We appreciate that very much. And hope we see you next month. And at this point, we're going to break away, and we're going to start our business meeting in a couple of minutes, just to give our board members a time to have a little comfort break. So we'll see you next month.